There's a moment in everyone's life when they catch their reflection and don't recognize the person staring back, not because they look different, but because something deeper has shifted. You stand there wondering when exactly you became this version of yourself, and more importantly, how you might become someone else entirely. This isn't about changing your hair or buying new clothes. This is about the profound psychological machinery that governs human transformation. You've probably felt it before, that restless stirring beneath the surface of your daily routine. The quiet voice whispering that there's more to you than what currently exists. Maybe it started with a book that changed how you see the world, or a conversation that cracked open possibilities you'd never considered. Perhaps it was a moment of crisis that stripped away everything you thought you knew about yourself, leaving you with nothing but potential. What's fascinating is that transformation isn't actually rare. It's happening constantly, in ways so subtle we barely notice. Your brain rewrites itself with every experience, every choice, every thought you entertain. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, but that clinical term barely captures the profound reality of what's occurring. You are literally rebuilding yourself moment by moment, decision by decision, belief by belief. But here's where it gets interesting. Most people live their entire lives without ever consciously directing this process. They drift through transformation like passengers on a ship they never learn to steer. Change happens to them rather than through them. They wake up one day, decades later, wondering how they ended up where they are, carrying patterns and behaviors that feel foreign to who they think they really are. The psychology of intentional transformation operates on entirely different principles. It requires understanding the hidden architecture of identity itself. Who you think you are isn't fixed or permanent. It's a story you've been telling yourself so consistently that it feels like absolute truth. But stories can be rewritten. Consider this. Every belief you hold about yourself was learned. Every limitation you accept was programmed. Every fear that holds you back was developed through experience and repetition. If these psychological structures were built, they can be rebuilt. The question isn't whether transformation is possible. The question is whether you're ready to become the architect of your own reconstruction. The process begins with recognizing that your current self isn't your final self. This sounds obvious, but it's psychologically profound. Most people identify so completely with their present thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that they can't imagine being fundamentally different. They mistake their patterns for their essence. They confuse their programming with their potential. But transformation requires a kind of psychological distance from yourself. You need to develop the capacity to observe your own mind without being completely absorbed by it, to watch your thoughts without automatically believing them, to notice your emotional reactions without being controlled by them. This observer self becomes the foundation for all conscious change. Think about the last time you made a significant life change. Maybe you quit a job that was draining your soul, ended a relationship that wasn't serving you, or finally started pursuing something you'd always dreamed about. What made that shift possible? It wasn't just willpower or motivation. Something deeper had to change first. Your relationship to yourself had to evolve. The most successful transformations happen when people stop trying to fix their problems and start changing their identity instead. When someone shifts from seeing themselves as a person who struggles with confidence to someone who is naturally self-assured, their external behavior follows automatically. When they move from identifying as someone who can't stick to commitments to someone who honors their word, discipline becomes effortless. This is why traditional goal setting often fails. You can't maintain behaviors that contradict your core sense of self. Your identity acts like a psychological thermostat, constantly pulling you back toward what feels familiar and safe. If you see yourself as disorganized, you'll sabotage your attempts at structure. If you believe you're not the type of person who exercises regularly, you'll find excuses to avoid the gym. But identity isn't carved in stone. It's more like a river that appears solid from a distance but is actually in constant motion. The key is learning to direct that flow rather than being swept along by it. This requires understanding the psychological forces that shape who you become. Your environment plays a massive role in transformation. Not just your physical surroundings, but the people you spend time with, the conversations you engage in, the content you consume, the activities you pursue. These inputs are constantly programming your subconscious mind, reinforcing certain patterns while weakening others. If you want to transform, you need to become intentional about the influences you allow into your mental ecosystem. But environment alone isn't enough. The most powerful transformations happen when people learn to work with their own psychology rather than against it. Your brain has built-in resistance to change because change represents potential danger to your survival system. The familiar feels safe, even when it's limiting or destructive. Understanding this resistance allows you to navigate it skillfully rather than fighting it directly. The people who transform most successfully don't rely on motivation or willpower. They understand that these resources are finite and unreliable. Instead, they design systems that make their desired behaviors inevitable. They structure their lives so that becoming their ideal self is the path of least resistance. This might mean changing your physical environment to support new habits, removing temptations that trigger old patterns, surrounding yourself with people who embody the qualities you want to develop, creating accountability structures that make it harder to retreat into familiar dysfunction than to move forward into growth. But perhaps the most crucial element of transformation is developing a clear vision of who you're becoming, not just what you want to achieve, but who you want to be. This isn't about creating an idealized fantasy version of yourself, it's about connecting with the authentic potential that already exists within you but hasn't been fully expressed. The most profound transformations happen when people discover that they're not trying to become someone else entirely. They're uncovering who they've always been underneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and limiting beliefs. They're not adding something foreign to themselves. They're removing what was never truly them in the first place. This process requires tremendous compassion for yourself. Transformation isn't about rejecting or hating your current self. It's about recognizing that who you are right now was perfectly adapted to the circumstances that shaped you. But circumstances change, and so can you. The patterns that once protected you might now be limiting you. The strategies that helped you survive might be preventing you from thriving. The psychology of transformation reveals that change isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a continuous process of becoming. There's no final version of yourself that represents completion. There's only the eternal dance between who you are and who you're capable of becoming. Understanding this liberates you from the pressure to get it right immediately and allows you to embrace transformation as a lifelong practice. Human beings are the only species capable of conscious evolution. You don't have to wait for external circumstances to change you. You can become an active participant in your own development. You can study the patterns that shape you, experiment with new ways of being, and gradually sculpt yourself into alignment with your deepest values and highest aspirations. The question isn't whether you have the capacity for transformation. The question is whether you're willing to take responsibility for directing it. Because once you understand the psychology behind how people change, you realize that becoming who you want to be isn't a matter of luck or circumstance. It's a matter of knowledge, intention, and consistent application of psychological principles that govern human development. The transformation process unfolds in stages that most people never recognize. It begins with what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable tension between who you are and who you sense you could become. This discomfort isn't a problem to solve. It's a signal that growth is trying to happen. Most people rush to eliminate this tension by either abandoning their vision or convincing themselves they're fine as they are. But those who learn to sit with dissonance discover it's actually the birthplace of authentic change. There's a phase that follows where everything feels uncertain. Your old patterns no longer satisfy you, but your new identity hasn't solidified yet. You exist in a psychological limbo between versions of yourself. This is the most dangerous time for transformation because the pull toward familiar dysfunction becomes almost irresistible. Your brain interprets this uncertainty as threat and floods your system with anxiety, doubt, and fear. During this phase, you'll experience what researchers call the extinction burst. Your old behaviors will actually intensify before they disappear. The part of you that's afraid of change will throw everything it has at maintaining the status quo. You might find yourself engaging in self-sabotage that seems to come out of nowhere. Old habits you thought you'd overcome will resurface with surprising strength. This isn't evidence that transformation isn't working. It's proof that it's working so well that your psychological defense systems are panicking. Understanding this phenomenon changes everything. When you expect the extinction burst, you can prepare for it. You can create support structures that help you navigate the temporary chaos without abandoning your growth. You can remind yourself that the intensity of resistance often correlates with the significance of the change you're making. The bigger the transformation, the louder your old self will protest. But something remarkable happens when you persist through this phase. your new patterns begin to feel natural. Neural pathways that once required conscious effort start operating automatically. The behaviors that initially demanded willpower become as effortless as breathing. You reach what psychologists call integration, where your new identity stops feeling like something you're trying on and starts feeling like who you actually are. This is where most transformation stories end, but it's actually where the real work begins. Because once you've successfully changed yourself once, you discover something profound about the nature of human potential. You realize that the person you've become isn't the final version of yourself either. You've simply learned how to learn. You've developed the meta skill of conscious evolution. The most successful transformers don't just change once and stop. They develop what researchers call a growth identity. They begin to see themselves as someone who grows, adapts, and evolves continuously. Change stops being something that happens to them occasionally and becomes something they do intentionally and regularly. They understand that stagnation isn't stability, it's slow death. This requires developing a completely different relationship with discomfort. Most people spend enormous energy trying to feel comfortable all the time. They mistake comfort for happiness and familiarity for safety. But transformation requires embracing discomfort as information. When something feels uncomfortable, it might mean you're doing something wrong, or it might mean you're growing in a direction that your current self doesn't recognize yet. Learning to distinguish between productive discomfort and destructive discomfort becomes a crucial skill. Productive discomfort feels challenging but energizing. It's the sensation of stretching beyond your current capacity without breaking. Destructive discomfort feels depleting and overwhelming. It's the feeling of forcing yourself into something that contradicts your core values or authentic nature. The people who transform most effectively learn to calibrate their growth. They understand that change happens best at the edge of their comfort zone, not far beyond it. Push too hard too fast and your psychological defense systems activate. Move too slowly and you never build enough momentum to overcome inertia. The sweet spot is that place where you feel challenged but not overwhelmed, stretched but not broken. But perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of transformation is that it often requires giving up who you think you should become in order to discover who you actually are. Society programs us with templates of success, happiness, and fulfillment that might have nothing to do with our authentic nature. Sometimes transformation means releasing these borrowed dreams and connecting with desires that emerge from your own depths. This process can be disorienting because it means questioning not just your current behaviors but your fundamental goals and values. You might discover that what you thought you wanted was actually what others expected you to want. You might find that your deepest aspirations contradict the image you've been trying to maintain. This isn't failure, it's alignment. The most profound transformations happen when people stop trying to become a better version of who they think they should be and start becoming a truer version of who they actually are. This requires developing the courage to disappoint people who have invested in your old identity. It means accepting that not everyone will understand or support your evolution. Some relationships will change or end as you change. This isn't a side effect of transformation. It's often a necessary part of it. Your social environment has tremendous power to either support or sabotage your growth. The people closest to you have unconscious investments in keeping you the same because your stability helps maintain theirs. When you change, you disrupt the entire system of relationships around you. Others might feel threatened by your growth because it highlights their own stagnation. They might actively discourage your transformation, not out of malice, but out of their own fear and discomfort. This is why building a support network of people who celebrate growth becomes essential. You need relationships with individuals who are also committed to evolution, who understand that supporting your transformation ultimately benefits everyone. These people exist, but you might need to seek them out intentionally. They're rarely found in the environments that shaped your old identity. The psychological research on transformation reveals something fascinating about human nature. We're not fixed entities trying to change, we're dynamic processes temporarily crystallized into patterns. Those patterns feel solid and permanent, but they're actually fluid and responsive. Understanding this changes how you approach growth. You're not breaking yourself down and rebuilding from scratch. You're redirecting energy that's already in motion. This redirection requires what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. You need to develop awareness of the mental processes that currently govern your life. Most people live inside their thoughts without ever examining them. They believe their internal narrative without questioning its accuracy or usefulness. But transformation demands stepping outside your own psychological system and observing it with curiosity rather than identification. Your thoughts aren't facts. Your emotions aren't commands. Your impulses aren't inevitabilities. These are simply phenomena arising in your consciousness, and you have far more choice about how to respond to them than you've been conditioned to believe. The voice in your head that says you can't change, that you've always been this way, that transformation is for other people, is just one perspective among many possible perspectives. Developing this observer consciousness takes practice. It requires catching yourself in the act of automatic thinking and gently redirecting your attention. When you notice yourself spiraling into familiar patterns of self-doubt or limitation, you can pause and ask different questions. Instead of accepting the thought as truth, you can examine it as data. Where did this belief come from? How is it serving you? What would be possible if it weren't true? The most effective transformers develop what researchers call psychological flexibility. They learn to hold their beliefs lightly, treating them as working hypotheses rather than fixed truths. They understand that certainty is often the enemy of growth, because it closes off possibilities that haven't been explored yet. They cultivate what Zen practitioners call beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined conclusions. This flexibility extends to their relationship with failure and setbacks. Instead of interpreting difficulties as evidence that transformation isn't working, they view them as information about what adjustments need to be made. They understand that the path of growth isn't linear. It includes plateaus, regressions, and apparent dead ends that later reveal themselves as necessary detours. Your relationship with time also shifts during transformation. Most people live with an unconscious urgency about change, wanting results immediately and becoming discouraged when progress feels slow. But psychological transformation operates on a different timeline than external achievement. Internal shifts often happen gradually, building momentum beneath the surface before becoming visible in behavior and circumstances. Learning to trust this process requires developing what psychologists call distress tolerance. You need to become comfortable with the gap between planting seeds and harvesting fruit. The most significant changes often feel like nothing is happening for long periods, then suddenly everything shifts at once. Understanding this prevents you from abandoning growth just before breakthrough occurs. The transformation process also reveals the interconnected nature of psychological change. You might start by working on one specific behavior or belief, only to discover that it's connected to patterns throughout your entire life. Healing one wound opens access to others that were hidden beneath it. Developing one capacity strengthens abilities you didn't know you possessed. Growth in any area tends to catalyze growth in all areas, because the self is ultimately one integrated system. This interconnectedness means that small changes can have disproportionate effects. Shifting one core belief can reshape your entire worldview. Healing one relationship pattern can transform all your connections. Developing one new habit can restructure your entire daily experience. The key is identifying which changes will create the most leverage, which shifts will cascade throughout your system most effectively. Sometimes the most powerful transformations come from addressing what seem like minor issues, the way you talk to yourself in private moments, how you respond to minor frustrations, what you do with the first few minutes after waking up. These seemingly insignificant patterns often carry the genetic code of your entire psychological structure. Change them, and everything else begins to reorganize around the new template. But transformation isn't just an individual process, it's also deeply social and cultural. The version of yourself that's possible depends partly on the collective consciousness of your time and place. Some transformations that feel natural and effortless in certain environments become nearly impossible in others. This is why changing your social and physical environment often catalyzes personal change in ways that internal work alone cannot achieve. Your psychological development is always happening in relationship to something larger than yourself. Whether that's family systems, cultural narratives, historical moments, or spiritual traditions, your individual transformation is part of a larger evolutionary process. Understanding this context can provide meaning and motivation during difficult phases of growth, when personal benefits aren't immediately apparent. The people who sustain transformation over decades develop what might be called evolutionary consciousness. They begin to see their personal growth as contribution to collective human development. They understand that becoming more authentic, more conscious, more capable doesn't just benefit them individually, It benefits everyone whose lives they touch. Their transformation becomes a gift to the world rather than just a personal project. This shift in perspective changes the entire emotional tone of growth. Instead of transformation feeling like self-improvement driven by inadequacy, it becomes self-expression driven by love. Instead of changing because you're not good enough as you are, you change because you're so magnificent that you want to explore the full range of what's possible through you. The deepest transformations happen when people discover they're not separate from life, trying to improve themselves within it. They are life expressing itself as individual consciousness, exploring its own potential through their unique perspective. This recognition doesn't eliminate the practical work of change, but it infuses that work with entirely different energy. So here's the truth that changes everything. You are never broken and needing to be fixed. You are never incomplete and needing to be finished. You are consciousness itself, endlessly creative, endlessly capable of reinventing the forms through which you express yourself. Transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning that convinced you otherwise. The moment you truly understand this, everything shifts. The weight of having to prove yourself disappears. The anxiety about whether you're doing it right dissolves. The fear that you might fail becomes irrelevant because there's nowhere to fall except back into the infinite creativity that is your essential nature. Your transformation doesn't end when this video ends. It continues with the next thought you choose to believe, the next action you decide to take, the next moment you remember that you're both the sculptor and the sculpture, the artist and the artwork, the dreamer and the dream. The only question left is what you'll create next.